Dr. Ethan Reed sat alone in his lab, staring at the device in front of him. His hands trembled with excitement. This was it, the moment he had been waiting for. After years of sleepless nights and failed experiments, he had finally done it. Ethan had built a time machine. The machine itself was small, no bigger than a microwave, with glowing blue lights along its edges. It didn't look like much, but inside it was the power to change everything. He could feel his heart racing as he picked up a small object, a coin from the table. Just a test, he whispered to himself, placing the coin inside the machine. He set the controls to send the coin back 5 minutes. His finger hovered over the activation button for a moment, hesitation creeping in. What if something went wrong? What if this wasn't safe? But Ethan pushed those thoughts aside. He had come too far to stop now. With a deep breath, he pressed the button. The machine hummed to life, the lights flashing brighter. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, in a flash, the coin vanished. Ethan's eyes widened. He looked at his watch. 5 minutes earlier, the coin had reappeared on the table, right where it had been before. It worked, Ethan whispered, his voice shaking with disbelief. It actually worked. The possibilities flooded his mind. He could change the past. He could fix things. Fix everything. And the first thing he would change was the day he lost her. Ethan couldn't stop thinking about it. His time machine worked. He had the power to change the past, and there was only one thing on his mind: saving Clara. It had been 2 years since the accident. The memory of that day still haunted him. The screeching tires, the terrible crash, and the silence that followed. If only he could go back, just for a moment, he could stop it. He could save her. His colleague and best friend, Dr. Emily Graves, entered the lab just as he was preparing the machine for his first real trip. "Are you seriously going to do this?" she asked, concern written all over her face. "You know the risks, Ethan. Changing the past could have huge consequences." Ethan shook his head, refusing to look at her. "I don't care. I have to do this. If I can stop the accident, everything will be different. I need to try." Emily stepped closer. "What if it makes things worse? You can't just mess with time like this." But Ethan was already strapping on the device. A small watch that would allow him to return to the present once he completed his mission. He had planned every detail, rehearsed every step in his mind. All he needed to do was be there, just before the crash, and warn Clara. "I have no choice, Emily," Ethan said softly, glancing at her one last time. "I can't live like this anymore." Without another word, he activated the machine. The world around him blurred, the colors swirling together, and then, with a sharp jolt, he was gone. Ethan had traveled back in time. Ethan opened his eyes, feeling disoriented. He was standing on the same street, but it was 2 years earlier. Cars passed by, and people went about their day, unaware that time had just been altered. His heart pounded in his chest as he spotted Clara across the street. She was laughing, talking on her phone, completely unaware of the danger that was about to unfold. Ethan's throat tightened. This was the moment. He could stop it. He ran toward her, his mind racing. "Clara!" he shouted. She looked up, surprised to see him. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "There's no time to explain." Ethan grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the road just as the car that would have hit her sped by, missing her by inches. The sound of screeching tires echoed in his ears, but this time, there was no crash, no accident. Clara stared at him wide-eyed. "You saved me? But how did you know?" Ethan couldn't answer. His head suddenly ached, and a strange feeling washed over him. It was like something had shifted, something big. But all that mattered was Clara. She was alive. He had done it. Ethan began. But before he could say more, the pain in his head grew worse, and his vision blurred. The world around him flickered, as if reality itself was bending. Something was wrong. "I have to go," Ethan whispered, feeling dizzy. He glanced at Clara one last time before activating the device on his wrist. In a flash, he disappeared, returning to the present. Ethan stumbled back into his lab, his heart racing with excitement. He had done it. He had saved Clara. But as he looked around, something felt off. The lab looked different. Different equipment, different colors. The air felt strange. He checked his watch and frowned. Why was everything changing? "Emily," he called, but there was no answer. The lab was empty. He felt a sudden chill run down his spine. Where was everyone? Ethan hurried to the door and stepped outside. The street was busy, but everything seemed strange. Buildings were different, and the people passing by didn't look familiar. Panic set in. He rushed to the nearest cafe, a place he used to visit often. The sign read, "The Cozy Bean," but it had a new look and different menu items. When he asked the barista about Emily, she looked confused. "Emily? Sorry, I don't know anyone by that name," she said, handing him a coffee. Ethan felt a wave of dread wash over him. Had his changes really affected everything? He pulled out his phone to check his contacts, but when he looked, he saw names he didn't recognize. Then he remembered Clara. He needed to find her. He had saved her, but what about the rest of his life? With a heavy heart, Ethan started walking. He had to find Clara and figure out what had happened to his world. But deep down, he feared the truth. Had saving her cost him everything else? Ethan wandered through the streets, his mind racing. He needed answers. He had saved Clara, but everything else felt wrong. As he walked, he noticed strange things. News reports on TV screens showed events he didn't remember happening. At a nearby park, he saw a small crowd gathered around a bench. Curious, he approached and heard a news anchor's voice reporting a disaster he didn't recognize. The sudden collapse of the old bridge. Several injured. His heart sank. Had saving Clara changed something big? He needed to find Emily. She always had a logical mind. If anyone could help him understand this mess, it was her. After searching for hours, Ethan finally found her in a library. She was sitting at a table, reading a book. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes widened in disbelief. "Ethan? How is this possible?" she gasped. "You disappeared." "Emily, I messed up. I went back to save Clara, but everything is different now. I don't know what I did, but people are suffering." Emily's face turned serious. "You shouldn't have changed the past, Ethan. Every little change creates ripples in time. We need to fix this. I need to go back again," Ethan said, desperation creeping into his voice. "I have to undo what I did." Emily shook her head. "It's not that simple. You could cause even more damage. We need to understand what happened first." Ethan felt hopeless. He had wanted to save one life, but now it seemed he might lose many more. Time was slipping away, and he had to act fast before it was too late. Ethan sat across from Emily, his mind racing with fear and regret. What do we do now? I can't just sit here while people suffer. Emily took a deep breath. We need to study what you did. Let's go back to the lab and look at the data from your time machine. Maybe we can find clues about the changes you caused. Ethan nodded, feeling a mix of hope and dread. They rushed back to the lab, where Ethan started examining the records. The screens flickered with images of the past and present. He noticed that each time he traveled, the timeline had shifted. Look at this, Emily pointed at the screen. Every time you change something, it creates a chain reaction. Saving Clara caused the bridge to collapse. It's like a domino effect. Ethan felt sick. I didn't just save one person. I put many others in danger. Exactly, Emily said, her expression serious. We have to find a way to reverse your changes. We need to go back to the moment before you saved Clara. Ethan's heart sank. But that means I have to let her die again. It's the only way to restore balance, Emily replied gently. If you go back and do nothing, the timeline might heal itself. But it'll hurt. You have to be strong. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. He had wanted to change the past for love, but now he realized that love sometimes meant letting go. He took a deep breath, trying to prepare himself for the hardest choice of his life. Okay, he said, his voice trembling. I'll do it. Ethan stared at the time machine, feeling both determined and terrified. He had to go back and let Clara die, but it felt like he was breaking a piece of himself. Emily stood beside him, her face a mix of support and concern. Remember, just let things happen as they were supposed to, she reminded him gently. You can't change anything this time. Ethan nodded, trying to focus. He set the machine to take him back to the day of the accident. With a deep breath, he pressed the button and felt the familiar rush of energy. In an instant, he was standing on the same street again, just like before. The sun shone brightly, and people walked by, unaware of what was about to happen. Clara was there, laughing with a friend, completely carefree. His heart ached at the sight of her. She looked so happy, and he wanted nothing more than to run to her and save her again. But he forced himself to stay still. He had to remember Emily's words. As the moment of the accident approached, Ethan felt the air around him shift. The familiar car sped down the road, just as it had before. His body trembled with fear, but he knew he had to stay strong. But just as the car got close, a sudden thought crossed his mind. What if he didn't have to let her die? What if there was a way to save her without causing chaos? He hesitated, fighting against the urge to intervene. The moment felt frozen in time, and he was torn between love and responsibility. Ethan, a voice called out behind him. It was Liam, a man he had never met but somehow felt he knew. Don't do it. You can't change fate. Ethan turned, confusion flooding his mind. Was this another time traveler? Did he have the answers? Please, Liam shouted, his voice urgent. You need to let it happen. Trust me. Ethan stood frozen, realizing that this was it, the moment that could change everything again. Would he listen to Liam and let Clara die? Or would he try to fight against fate one last time? Ethan turned to Liam, desperate for answers. What do you mean, trust you? Liam stepped closer, urgency in his eyes. I'm from the future, Ethan. I've seen what happens when you try to change the past. Every time you do, it makes things worse. You can't save Clara without hurting countless others. But she'll die, Ethan shouted, feeling his heart break. I can't let that happen again. I understand, Liam said, his voice steady. But by saving her, you've already changed the timeline. The more you try to fix it, the more chaos you create. You have to let fate take its course this time. Ethan looked back at Clara. She was smiling, unaware of the danger approaching. He felt torn inside, knowing that if he did nothing, he would lose her forever. But what if Liam was right? What if he truly was the protector of the timeline? Please, Ethan, Liam urged. Think about the people you're trying to save. If you keep changing things, you might lose everything you love. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. The weight of the decision pressed heavily on him. He realized that this was not just about Clara. It was about the future of everyone he cared about. With a heavy heart, Ethan took a deep breath and nodded. Okay, I'll let it happen. Liam smiled, relief washing over his face. You're making the right choice. Trust in the timeline. Ethan felt the moment rush back. The car sped toward Clara, and he stood frozen, allowing fate to unfold. As the sound of screeching tires filled the air, he felt a part of him shatter, but he also felt a strange sense of peace. He had made his choice, and now all he could do was watch. Ethan stood in the middle of the street, watching the accident unfold. Clara was laughing just moments before, and now she was in danger. The car sped toward her, and his heart raced with fear. He had made the decision to let fate take its course, but the pain of losing her felt unbearable. Just as he prepared himself for the worst, Liam's voice broke through his thoughts. Ethan, you need to go back now, Liam shouted. You have to undo the damage you've done. Ethan turned to Liam, realizing the urgency in his eyes. What do you mean? I thought I had to let this happen. No, you need to return to your original timeline before it's too late. You can still fix this. Ethan felt a wave of confusion. But how can I fix it if I let her die? Because it's the only way to restore balance. You can't keep trying to change fate without facing the consequences. With no time to waste, Ethan glanced back at Clara one last time. Tears filled his eyes, and he felt a deep sorrow for what was about to happen. He activated the time machine on his wrist, feeling the familiar pull as the world around him began to blur. I'm sorry, Clara, he shouted as he was pulled away, leaving her behind. In a flash, he found himself back in the lab, surrounded by the equipment he had used to create the time machine. It was like a dream. Everything was just as he had left it. But now Ethan understood. He had to destroy the machine. If he didn't, he might be tempted to try again, risking everything once more. With shaky hands, he pressed a few buttons and watched as the machine powered down, its lights flickering before going dark. He felt a mix of sadness and relief. He could never change the past, but maybe, just maybe, he could learn to live with it. The timeline was safe, and for the first time, he felt a small flicker of hope for the future. Days passed, and Ethan tried to adjust to life without the time machine. It was hard, especially when thoughts of Clara crept into his mind. He missed her deeply, but he knew he had made the right choice. One afternoon, as he sat in his lab, Emily walked in, holding a cup of coffee. Hey, how are you doing? She asked softly. Ethan looked up, forcing a smile. I'm okay. Just thinking. Emily sat down beside him. I know it's tough, but you did the right thing. Clara's memory will always be with you. Ethan nodded. I just wish I could talk to her one more time. Just then, his phone buzzed. He picked it up, surprised to see a message from an unknown number. He opened it and felt his heart skip a beat. It was a photo of a smiling Clara at a local cafe, holding a sign that read, I'm okay. Tears filled Ethan's eyes. Clara was alive and she had moved on just like he needed to. A wave of relief washed over him. Who is it? Emily asked, curious. Ethan turned the phone to her, and they both looked at the picture. It's Clara. She's okay. A smile spread across Emily's face. See? She's living her life. You can too. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling lighter. He realized that he could carry Clara in his heart while also looking forward to his own future. Thank you for being here for me, he said to Emily, feeling grateful. Always, she replied, reaching out to squeeze his hand. With renewed hope, Ethan stood up and looked out the window. He was ready to embrace life again, ready to make new memories, and maybe even find new love. The past would always be a part of him, but the future was bright, and he was ready for it. Ethan spent the next few weeks focusing on his work and healing from his loss. He immersed himself in research, exploring new ideas and projects. Every day felt a little lighter, but he still thought of Clara often. One sunny Saturday, Emily invited him to a local fair. You need a break, Ethan. Let's go have some fun, she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. Ethan hesitated. I'm not sure. I still feel sad. Come on. It'll be good for you. You can't let grief hold you back forever, she encouraged. After a moment, he smiled and agreed. Okay, let's do it. At the fair, colorful lights twinkled everywhere, and laughter filled the air. Ethan felt a little spark of joy as he walked alongside Emily. They played games, won prizes, and even shared a giant funnel cake. As they wandered through the crowd, Ethan spotted a booth with art displayed. A painting caught his eye, a beautiful landscape of a serene lake surrounded by mountains. It's stunning, he said, admiring the colors. Why don't you buy it? Emily suggested. It could brighten up your lab. Ethan thought for a moment. You know what? I will. He approached the artist, a young woman with a warm smile. I'd like to buy this painting, he said. Thank you. It's one of my favorites, she replied, her face lighting up. As they chatted, Ethan felt a connection. Her name was Mia, and they talked about art, nature, and their dreams. For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt a sense of hope blooming inside him. When he left the fair that day, he carried the painting under his arm and a smile on his face. He realized that while Clara would always be a part of him, it was okay to open his heart to new experiences and friendships. Ethan was moving forward, and he was ready to embrace whatever came next.